Title: Agatha Raisin and the Dispute at Dembley Gate. Dear listeners, welcome to tonight's mystery. I'm Sam, your host, and I'm delighted to have you join me for another captivating tale. Before we begin, I'd love to know where are you tuning in from tonight? Are you relaxing at home, on the go, or somewhere a bit unexpected? Share your answer in the comment. I always enjoy hearing from our wonderful community. And do not forget to like and subscribe me for more mysteries every day. Now, let's get cozy and dive into tonight's story. Chapter 1. A Quarrel at the Gate. The morning sunlight slanted gently across Castley, gilding the stone cottages and washing the narrow lane in gold. Agatha Raisin sat by her kitchen window, a cup of coffee steaming beside her, the comforting smell mingling with the faint scent of lavender from her garden. For once the world seemed perfectly content to leave her alone. She leaned back, one slippered foot nudging her cat off the table, and opened the latest issue of the Cotswold Voice. "Village life," she murmured to herself, scanning the headlines with the sharp eye of someone who both despised and depended on gossip. Birth announcements, a bake sale, and someone's overgrown hedge complaint, the usual parade of mild scandal. She was about to turn the page when her gaze caught on a smaller note tucked between the columns. Altercation at Dembley Gate. Tempers flared over footpath rights. Parish meeting expected. Footpaths, Agatha muttered, sipping her coffee. Nothing gets people riled like a public right-of-way. A knock came at the back door before she could finish her thought. Mrs. Bloxby, the vicar's wife and Agatha's closest ally in all things reasonable, stood there holding a small basket of scones. Her expression was polite, but Agatha knew that particular look, the one that meant juicy news had arrived. "Morning, Mrs. Raisin," she greeted warmly.
"I thought you might like something fresh with your coffee. Don't tease me, Bloxby."
"You've heard something?" Mrs. Bloxby smiled faintly, setting the basket down. "Only that there was quite a scene up near Dembley. Mrs. Dalrymple and that new woman, Fiona Bexley, had a shouting match at the old gate. I'm told people stopped their cars to watch." Agatha's brows arched.
"Dalrymple?
The widow with the pet peacocks?"
"The same.
She insists the gate marks private land, but Fiona swears it's a public path. A dreadful fuss, apparently. Someone even called the parish council." Agatha leaned forward, the morning calm already dissolving.
"Over a gate?"
Mrs. Bloxby gave a knowing look. "You know how these things go. It's never just about the gate." Agatha's mind began to turn like a clock coming to life. She had spent months trying to stay out of trouble, contenting herself with crossword puzzles and amateur gardening. But there was something irresistible about the image of two women locked in a standoff at the edge of an ancient estate. "What do we know about this Fiona person?" she asked, feigning nonchalance as she buttered a scone. "Moved here last month from Bath," Mrs. Bloxby replied. "Very opinionated about walkers' rights. The councilman said she's been pestering him for old records. Something about Dembley's original boundaries." Agatha stopped mid-bite. "Original boundaries? That estate's been standing since Queen Victoria's time."
"What's she hoping to find buried?"
Mrs. Bloxby chuckled softly.
"Perhaps just attention." Agatha wasn't convinced.
Her instincts, honed through too many village murders and mysteries, whispered otherwise. People don't dig through land records for fun. There's always something missing. A letter, a deed, a signature. Mrs. Bloxby tilted her head thoughtfully. "Funny you mention letters. The council clerk said a document from the old Dembley file went missing years ago, something sealed with blue wax."
"No one ever found it." The cat jumped onto the counter, tail flicking.
A gust of wind slipped through the open window, rustling the pages of the Cotswold Voice. Somewhere beyond the village, faint and distant, came the clanging sound of metal, like a gate slamming shut. Agatha glanced toward the noise, her pulse quickening just a little. "Probably the postman," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Mrs. Bloxby followed her gaze. "The wind carries odd sounds this morning." When the vicar's wife finally left, Agatha stood at her window, coffee gone cold. The village lane was quiet again, sunlight glittering off wet cobbles from the night's drizzle. Yet something about the air had changed. that subtle shift she'd come to recognize before every tangle of secrets began to unravel. She folded the newspaper carefully, eyes returning to the small headline. "Altercation at Dembley Gate? Well," she murmured, reaching for her coat, "if it's just a quarrel about a fence, I'll eat my scone." And with that, Carsley's calm morning slipped quietly into mystery. The next morning brought a brisk wind and the sharp sound of tires crunching over gravel. Agatha looked up from pruning her rose bushes to see a familiar silver convertible sweeping up her drive. No one else in Carsley had quite that careless confidence behind the wheel. Sir Charles Frayth stepped out, dressed immaculately as always, beige coat, silk scarf, and the faint smirk of a man who rarely arrived anywhere without a story to tell. "Agatha." "My dear," he called, leaning casually on the car door.
Still terrorizing the local plant life? Agatha brushed a thorn from her glove and gave him a look.
"If you've come to insult my gardening, Charles, you can turn that contraption around right now." Perish the thought. He strode toward her, hands in pockets, eyes bright with mischief.
"Actually, I'm here on business, or rather, a favour to the parish council."
"They've asked me to mediate a little quarrel over at Dembley Gate. Something about a walking path and a furious widow." Agatha's pruning shears froze mid-air.
"Dembley Gate?"
"Don't tell me you're meddling in that nonsense." "Not meddling," Charles said lightly. "Simply lending my local expertise. Apparently I have the temperament for diplomacy," Agatha snorted. "You have the temperament for brandy at noon, not diplomacy." "True," he admitted cheerfully. "But Mrs. Dalrymple insisted. She claims I'm the only one in the county she can speak to without her blood pressure rising." Agatha eyed him skeptically. "And what does Fiona Bexley think of that?"
"Ah, the fiery newcomer. I hear she's leading a pack of ramblers who insist the gate should be open to the public. Very modern of her." His grin widened. "I can't imagine what you'd make of her, Agatha." Agatha folded her arms. "You don't need to imagine. I'll come and see for myself," Charles blinked. "You?" "Yes, me."
"I've had quite enough of crossword puzzles and council bake sales. Consider me your assistant observer." He gave a theatrical sigh. "You'll scare everyone off before we even start." "Then you'd best drive fast," she replied.
Already heading for her coat, moments later.
They were gliding through the countryside, the Cotswold hills rolling soft and green beneath the morning light.
Agatha sat primly in the passenger seat, hair pinned back, scarf fluttering.
The wind carried the scent of damp earth and wildflowers. Deceptively peaceful, she thought, for a place supposedly brimming with tempers and trespass. Charles hummed as they drove, one hand on the wheel. "You know, Dembley has a way of swallowing its disputes whole. Been that way since the 19th century.
Families fight, lawyers intervene, and the land simply waits them out." Agatha shot him a look.
"That's a cheerful thought." He smiled faintly.
"Oh, don't worry.
"You'll enjoy it. Nothing like a bit of genteel chaos to brighten your week." They turned down a narrow lane bordered by ivy-covered walls. Ahead stood the infamous gate, wrought iron, blackened with age, half swallowed by climbing vines. Beyond it stretched the long drive to Dembley Manor, its windows glinting in the pale light. On the other side of the fence several villagers were gathered, papers in hand, voices raised in heated debate. "That must be the walking group," Charles murmured. "And there's Mrs. Dalrymple, holding court as if she owns half of Gloucestershire." "She might," Agatha replied dryly. The car rolled to a stop. Agatha stepped out, her heels crunching on gravel. A sharp-eyed woman in a tweed jacket, Fiona Bexley no doubt, broke off mid-sentence to glare at the newcomers. Charles greeted her with a polished smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Miss Bexley, Sir Charles Frayth," Agatha introduced. Before Charles could charm his way into trouble, Fiona's expression softened, but only slightly. "So you're the mediator. Let's hope you're more reasonable than the widow." Charles's laugh was smooth but tight. Reasonable is such a subjective word. Agatha watched the brief exchange, noting how Charles's confidence met Fiona's defiance like two blades crossing. The air between them sparked with something that wasn't quite hostility, nor was it entirely friendly. Her gaze drifted to the gate itself. Rusted hinges creaked faintly in the breeze, the sound almost like a sigh. Something about it, the stillness, the age, the faint smell of metal and rain felt like a held breath waiting to be released. Agatha straightened, eyes narrowing. "Well," she murmured to herself, "this is going to be anything but dull." Chapter 2. The People Behind the Fence. Dembley Manor stood like a stern matron on the edge of the fields, grand, overgrown, and dignified in its refusal to age gracefully. Ivy clawed up its stone facade, half hiding the carved initials over the door. Agatha took it all in as Charles rapped politely on the knocker. The sound echoed through the hall beyond, sharp and hollow. A few moments later, the door opened to reveal Mrs. Dalrymple herself. She was tall and slender, her silver hair twisted into a knot so tight it seemed to pull her expression taut. Pearls hung at her throat, and her gloved hands clasped together as if she'd rather not touch the world. "Sir Charles," she said, in a voice clipped with practiced civility.
"And Mrs. Raisin, was it?" "Agatha," Agatha corrected, offering a hand. Mrs. Dalrymple hesitated before taking it, the shake as brief as a flicker. "Do come in."
"I've prepared tea, though I can't say I'm in the mood for company after yesterday's display." The drawing room was immaculate. Polished wood, lace curtains, and a faint scent of lavender polish. Only the low table in the centre betrayed disorder, letters spread across it, a folded newspaper, and a scattering of crumbs on a china plate. Mrs. Dalrymple motioned to the chairs.
"I suppose you've come to hear my side of this absurd business," Charles smiled.
"Just a friendly chat, my dear. The council wants peace restored, that's all." "Peace," Mrs. Dalrymple said, settling opposite them, "would be easier to achieve if people respected property lines." She lifted her chin slightly. "That Bexley woman and her hikers, they trampled through my flower beds as though they owned the place. Tulips I'd grown from Dutch bulbs, mind you. Years of care destroyed in minutes." Agatha sipped her tea, noting the faint tremor in Mrs. Dalrymple's hand as she poured.
"And this all started because of a path?"
Mrs. Dalrymple's lips tightened. "It's not a path.
"It's my land."
The public right-of-way ends before the gate, as it always has. That woman claims otherwise, waving her so-called documents and insisting on access. May we see these documents?"
Agatha asked casually. "Hardly," Mrs. Dalrymple sniffed.
"If she had any true proof, she'd have shown it to the council instead of shouting in the lane." Charles leaned back, still smiling, though Agatha could sense his interest sharpening.
"You've lived here quite some time, haven't you?"
"You'd know if there were old claims." "Since 1974, Mrs. Dalrymple replied quickly. Too quickly. My late husband bought Dembley after it fell from the original family's hands. It's mine, legally and morally." As she spoke, Agatha's gaze wandered across the room. On a sideboard near the window sat a stack of silver-framed photographs, all landscapes, none of people. A single photo faced backward. She made a mental note. When she reached for another scone, her sleeve brushed a corner of parchment peeking from beneath a tray. She pretended not to notice at first, but her eyes caught the faded ink. DG 1872, a map by the look of it. Hand-drawn, edges frayed. Agatha straightened, heart ticking faster. "You have such lovely antiques, Mrs. Dalrymple. That sideboard looks quite old." Mrs. Dalrymple stiffened, following her glance, too late to conceal her reaction. "Old things linger here. I've kept the house as it was." She reached to adjust the tea tray, conveniently covering the exposed parchment. "Dembley doesn't change." "Indeed," Agatha murmured, her tone polite but curious. She caught sight of faint red scratches across the widow's wrist, fresh, thin lines as if from brambles, or perhaps something sharper. Mrs. Dalrymple noticed her gaze and tugged down her sleeve. "Gardening mishap," she said curtly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I must check on the gardener about the ruined beds." Charles rose smoothly, but Agatha lingered a second longer, her eyes drifting once more to the half-hidden map. The paper rustled softly, as if shifting in a stray draught, or perhaps by some restless memory. "Thank you for the tea," Agatha said, offering a bright smile that fooled no one. "You've been most illuminating." Outside, the wind carried the scent of wet soil and roses. Agatha paused at the steps, glancing back at the grand old house. "She's hiding something," she said quietly. Charles adjusted his cufflinks. "Course she is."
That's what makes it interesting. The Red Fox Inn was buzzing by late afternoon. The comforting hum of tankards clinking, fire crackling, and gossip rippling through the low, beamed room. Agatha liked it at once.
The kind of place where secrets floated above pints of ale, waiting for someone curious enough to catch them. Fiona Bexley sat near the window, her red scarf catching the weak sunlight. She rose when Charles approached, greeting him with a confident smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Sir Charles Fraith.
"You're just the man I needed to see. And Mrs. Raisin, I've heard about your—"
"Reputation for curiosity," Agatha arched a brow. "That sounds dangerously close to flattery." "Or warning," Charles murmured, settling opposite her. Fiona laughed, a bright, practiced sound. "I assure you I only want the truth out. Mrs. Dalrymple thinks she owns the countryside, but people have walked that path for generations. It's a public right-of-way, recorded in council archives decades ago." She reached into her canvas bag and pulled out a folder, creased, slightly damp, smelling faintly of earth. Inside were photocopied letters bearing the parish seal. The ink was smudged in places, a few signatures faint or missing entirely. Agatha leaned closer, pretending to study them while really observing Fiona's hands. Nails bitten, fingers ink-stained. "Convenient, isn't it?" she said lightly. "That the signatures happen to be unreadable." Fiona's smile faltered. "It rained."
"I slipped on the trail last week and the papers got wet."
"I've asked the council to resend copies." "Of course," Agatha said. Her tone was pleasant, but her mind was already sorting details, wet papers, nervous eyes, an edge of desperation under the charm. Charles reached for his glass. "You do seem very invested in this, Miss Bexley. Why the passion for a little footpath?" Fiona's expression flickered, just for a moment. "Because it's not about land. It's about history. The Dembley estate's been keeping people off that trail for years, erasing what used to be there. I think there's something buried beyond that gate. Old records, maybe a chapel foundation. The council archives mention something about the Dembley Green Line, but the reference cuts off." Agatha's pulse quickened. "Dembley archives, you say?" Fiona looked away, fiddling with her scarf. "Yes, though I can't get access without council permission."
"I've written 3 times. Or maybe," Agatha said, watching her carefully.
"You already found something and don't want anyone else to know." Fiona laughed again, but this time the sound came too quickly. "Mrs. Raisin, if I'd found anything worth hiding, you'd have heard about it in the Gazette by now." Before Agatha could reply, the inn door creaked open and a farmer in a muddy coat shuffled past their table. He glanced briefly at Fiona, then muttered under his breath, "She never found what she came looking for." Fiona froze.
"Ignore him," she said tightly.
"He's just another villager who hates change." But Agatha had caught it, the faint tremor in her voice, the sudden flush that betrayed nerves. Whatever Fiona had come to Dembley for, it wasn't just a path. Charles swirled his drink thoughtfully.
"You know," he said softly, "I walked those fields years ago."
The soil's strange there, redder than the rest. Almost looked stained. He glanced up at Fiona. "There's blood in that soil somewhere." Fiona's eyes flicked toward him, sharp and searching. "You sound like you believe the local ghost stories." "Not at all," he said, with a small, knowing smile. "But they usually start with something true." The silence that followed was thin and taut. Outside, the wind pressed against the old window panes, carrying the faint clang of metal, the sound of the Dembley Gate in the distance, swaying on its rusted hinges. Agatha finished her tea slowly, gaze fixed on Fiona's torn documents. The missing signature nagged at her, one line ripped clean away as if deliberately removed. "Well," she said, rising, "it seems we've 2 very convincing stories and 1 very curious gate. I suppose the truth's waiting on the other side." Fiona gathered her papers with care, avoiding Agatha's eyes. "If you're going there, be careful. Dembley doesn't take kindly to trespassers," Agatha smiled. "Neither do I." As they stepped into the fading daylight, Charles offered her his arm. "You're enjoying this far too much, Aggie," She gave a little hum of satisfaction. "Course I am." Nothing ruins a perfectly good morning like peace and quiet. The inn door shut behind them with a soft thud, leaving the murmurs of the locals to rise again, half gossip,
half warning, as the mystery of Dembley deepened just a little further.
Chapter 3. Footsteps in the fog. Sleep refused to come. Agatha tossed and turned beneath her quilt, the faint ticking of the bedside clock marking time like an accusation. Outside, Carsley lay draped in silence. No owl call, no rustle of hedgerows, just the thick hush of an English night pressing close against her window. Somewhere far off, a dog barked once, then nothing. By 11:30, she'd given up entirely. She pulled on her coat, tugged a scarf around her neck, and muttered to herself, "If I don't see that blasted gate again tonight, I'll only dream of it anyway." The drive to Dembley was short, but the mist had thickened, lying low over the lanes like spilled milk. Her headlights struggled to cut through it, turning the hedgerows into ghostly walls. When she reached the old estate boundary, she parked by the verge and killed the engine. The silence that followed was dense, almost alive. The iron gate loomed ahead, black and skeletal against the whiteness. Its latch gleamed faintly in the weak light of her torch. She frowned. The last time she'd been here, it had been firmly fastened. Now it hung loose, barely caught. She hesitated.
"Curiosity killed the cat," she whispered.
But satisfaction brought it back. The gate creaked under her hand as she eased it open a fraction. The sound echoed unnaturally, long, hollow, lonely. The path beyond was swallowed by fog. She could just make out a single boot print pressed deep into the mud, fresh, the tread still sharp. Another step might have followed, but the earth turned slick and blank, as if the rest had been swallowed whole. A faint sound drifted through the mist then, the muffled murmur of voices, 2, maybe 3. She strained to catch the words. One was low and rough, edged with temper, the other softer, pleading. The rhythm of argument, though she couldn't make out the cause. "Hello," she called. The sound of her own voice startled her, too loud in the stillness. The voices stopped. The fog seemed to tighten around her. For a moment she was sure she heard breathing, slow, ragged, somewhere near the gatepost. Agatha swung the torch toward the sound, but it revealed only mist and branches dripping with condensation. Her heart beat uncomfortably fast.
"Nonsense," she muttered.
Fog plays tricks on the ears. Yet, even as she said it, she felt the unmistakable sense of being watched. She crouched, running her fingers lightly along the iron hinge. Something rough brushed her fingertips. A scrap of fabric caught in the metal were blue, torn, and damp. It looked recent. She folded it carefully into her pocket. The air carried a faint metallic tang, then sharp and sour. Blood or something like it. Agatha straightened abruptly. "Enough midnight adventuring for one night," she said to no one, though her voice came out unsteady. As she turned to leave, the gate swung wider on its own, the hinges groaning. She froze, listening. There was no wind. Nothing moved but the mist itself, curling slow and heavy around her boots. Behind her, a faint click, like the crunch of gravel underfoot. She spun round, torch beam flashing wildly over the hedge. Nothing. But on the upper window of the abandoned Dembley gardener's cottage, a pale circle of fog blossomed against the glass. A breath mark, as if someone unseen were watching from inside. Her pulse thudded. She took a cautious step back, then another, until she was safely at her car. The breath mark faded. The mist thinned slightly, revealing the gate standing open, just enough to invite or warn. Agatha climbed into her car, slammed the door, and sat still for a long time. Through the windshield, she could see the faint glimmer of metal where the latch hung loose. The boot print was already softening under the dew, its edges blurring into the mud. By morning, she suspected, it would be gone entirely, as though it had never been there. But the blue scrap in her pocket said otherwise, and somewhere, in the fog behind the gate, something, or someone, had breathed her name. The next morning dawned pale and uncertain, the kind of grey that makes even roosters sound hesitant. Agatha sat at her kitchen table with a steaming mug of coffee and the Castley Gazette spread before her, but the words blurred. Her thoughts kept circling back to the fog, the open gate, and the whisper she might have imagined. When her phone rang, she jumped. Mrs. Bloxby's voice came through, strained and breathless.
"Agatha, are you coming to the council meeting?"
"They're all in a flurry about that Dembley business. Fiona Bexley hasn't turned up." Agatha's pulse gave a small, traitorous leap.
"Not turned up?"
"She's usually the first to make a scene. That's precisely why they're worried," the vicar's wife said softly. "She was meant to present her case at 10, and she never arrived. Charles is already on his way to the village hall." Agatha didn't bother with more questions. She was out the door in minutes, scarf half-tied, her mind buzzing. The morning mist still clung to the hedges as she drove toward Dembley, her headlights catching glimpses of villagers gathered in uneasy clusters. At the hall, the air felt thick with speculation. Voices overlapped. "She's probably sulking. You know how these campaigners are. Poor thing. Maybe she got lost in the fog." Agatha pushed through until she found Charles leaning against a table, arms folded, expression grave.
"Well?" she demanded. He sighed.
"They found a walking stick."
"Near the gate." A hush fell around them as if the words themselves carried weight. Agatha pictured the stick immediately. Polished wood, silver cap, something stylishly old-fashioned.
"Found how?" she asked. "Lying in the mud," Charles said quietly. "The odd thing is the engraving. F.B. Her initials, of course, but someone scratched over older letters underneath. You can just make out a C and a D. CD?"
Agatha repeated.
"Mrs. Dalrymple?" He nodded slightly. "Looks that way. Perhaps an old gift? Or something she found?" Before Agatha could answer, the church door creaked open and Mrs. Dalrymple swept in. Elegant, pale, a thin shawl around her shoulders. "What's all this nonsense?" she demanded.
"A missing woman. Over a footpath?"
But her voice trembled on the last word. When Charles gently mentioned the walking stick, her hand flew to her mouth.
"The gate," she whispered.
They should have left it shut. Then, without warning, her knees buckled. A collective gasp went up as villagers rushed forward, but no one had touched her. She simply crumpled, fainting dead away. Agatha crouched beside her, pressing a cool hand to the widow's wrist. The pulse fluttered erratically. "She's not injured," Agatha murmured. "Just shocked. Though I'd dearly like to know why." "She'll be all right," the vicar said softly from the doorway, his eyes fixed on the floor.
It's happened again." Agatha's head snapped up. "Again?"
He hesitated, lips tightening. "Years ago, another disappearance. Near the same gate. We were told it was an accident, but—" He stopped himself, shaking his head. Best not dredge up old grief. Agatha straightened slowly, her mind whirring.
The same gate, the same fog.
The same fear in people's eyes. Outside, the low wail of a siren began to rise, the sound of the police van approaching from Mercester. The villagers parted silently as it rolled up the lane. 2 officers stepped out, boots squelching in the damp earth. One of them, a young constable, lifted something wrapped in cloth from a bag. "Found this beside the stick," he said, voice uncertain. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a crumpled scrap of paper scrawled in heavy ink. "Dembley doesn't forgive." A shiver passed through the crowd. Agatha stared at the note, unease prickling at her spine. The letters were bold, deliberate, not hurried. Whoever wrote it wanted to be understood. Charles touched her elbow. "This is no longer about a property dispute, is it?" "No," Agatha said quietly, watching the fog creep along the hedgerow outside. "It's about something Dembley buried, and it's starting to come back up." The constable's voice cut through the murmurs. "We'll search the estate and the adjoining fields."
"Everyone, please stay clear of the gate." But Agatha was already thinking ahead, her mind retracing every step she'd taken the night before.
The latch, the boot print, the breath on the glass. She'd come within inches of something, or someone, the fog had swallowed whole. She looked once more at the faintly smudged words on the note. "Dembley doesn't forgive." "Well," she murmured, slipping her coat tighter around her shoulders. "Neither do I." Chapter 4. Secrets Beneath the Ivy. The church smelled faintly of old polish and lavender when Agatha arrived that afternoon. Rain whispered against the windows, and dust motes floated lazily in the golden light streaming through the stained glass. Mrs. Blocksby greeted her at the parish door with her usual serene smile and a tray of tea balanced on one
"Hand, you're looking unusually intent."
setting the tray down beside a stack of cracked leather volumes. "I've been called worse," Agatha replied. "Charles said the council record stopped short of anything useful, so I thought we'd dig where the paper's yellowed enough to tell the truth." Mrs. Blocksby chuckled softly. Parish archives rarely lie. They just whisper. Together they descended into the small vestry room beneath the nave, where shelves bowed under the weight of centuries-old ledgers. The air was cool and still, the kind of quiet that invited secrets to speak if you listened long enough. Agatha ran her fingers along the bindings until she found one marked 1872. The gilt lettering was nearly worn away. She tugged it free, sending a puff of dust spiraling into the lamplight. The spine creaked open, and the smell of old ink filled the room. "Here," Mrs. Blocksby said, leaning closer. "The Dembley boundary dispute." The entry was written in an elegant, looping hand between the estate of Dalrymple and the parish of Dembley, regarding rights of passage and inheritance. Agatha's eyes narrowed. "Dalrymple? There's always a Dalrymple." Mrs. Blocksby smiled faintly. "Some families thrive on quarrels."
Others seem born from them. The record told a curious tale, a lost heir, a disputed dowry, and a boundary line that shifted mysteriously one winter when the river flooded.
Beneath the clerk's notes, a sketch had been glued, an ink drawing of a wrought iron gate surrounded by ivy, labelled DG 1872. Agatha tapped the corner thoughtfully. The same initials on Mrs. Dalrymple's old map. "Indeed," said Mrs. Blocksby, "and the same gate at the heart of trouble then as now." She turned a page carefully, revealing a short addendum pinned to the margin, a list of property transfers sealed in red wax. The seal's impression caught the light, intricate and faintly familiar, a small oak leaf encircled by a ring. Agatha's pulse quickened. That symbol, Fiona had the same seal in her folder. She said it was part of the council archive, but what if it wasn't? What if it came from here? Mrs. Blocksby's brow furrowed. "And she might have seen this ledger before you." Agatha frowned, thinking of Fiona's smudged papers and nervous smile. If she connected the Dalrymple name across centuries, she might have stumbled on something best left alone. Maybe she realized this isn't about a footpath at all, it's about money. Buried funds, inheritance, something hidden behind that gate. They read further, piecing together fragments, a mention of a sealed chest of estate assets, a missing heir who vanished abroad, a final note marked, "Case unresolved." "Unresolved," Agatha muttered. "Seems to be Dembley's favourite word." Mrs. Blocksby poured the tea, her gentle eyes thoughtful. "You know, Agatha, history has a way of repeating itself for those who ignore it." Agatha accepted the cup, her mind miles away. "Or for those who dig too deep," the vicar's wife smiled sadly. "You've never been one to stop digging." Agatha closed the ledger slowly, her fingers resting on the embossed initials. The faint warmth of discovery mingled with unease. "If the past is echoing," she murmured, "I'd better start listening before someone else disappears." The rain outside thickened to a steady drumming, masking the faint sound of footsteps above, someone moving quietly through the nave. Agatha looked up sharply, but Mrs. Blocksby only poured another cup. "Probably the wind," she said. But Agatha's instincts prickled. In her experience, the wind rarely wore leather soles. Agatha found Charles in the garden when she returned from the parish archives, leaning casually against the iron railing, hands tucked into his pockets. His coat bore a fine layer of dew, and one glove was smudged with dark mud. "You look festive," she said, raising an eyebrow. "Did you wrestle a bog monster on your way here?" He smiled faintly, though his eyes flicked toward the hedge nervously. Something like that.
A late-night walk, nothing more, nothing more,
she repeated, arms crossed.
At midnight, alone?
Through Dembley? Charles's grin widened, half mischievous, half sheepish. Technically true. But I had company in mind. Someone who never showed. Agatha's gaze sharpened. Fiona? He shrugged, pretending casual indifference. Perhaps. Though I like to think of it as a rendezvous with destiny, or at least curiosity. You're enjoying this far too much, Agatha said, a smile tugging at her lips despite herself.
And your glove, Mud, you say? I see. He held up the hand dramatically.
Completely unrelated. Likely a stray root or some particularly aggressive ivy. Agatha leaned forward, mock serious. Right. Midnight strolls, mysterious meetings, mud-stained gloves. And here I thought you were a man of routine and civility. He laughed soft and low. Routine is terribly dull, Aggie, and civility rarely solves disputes over property or missing heirs. She shook her head, amused but uneasy. Speaking of disputes, did you notice anything odd? Charles's expression flickered.
Apart from the gate?
Yes, I returned to the Dembley boundary this morning.
It's chained now. Together they walked down the gravel lane, the early sun turning frost to silver and mist to warmth.
The gate loomed ahead, imposing and final. A fresh chain looped tightly through the wrought iron links, a padlock glinting brightly. Agatha squinted. New lock? Charles nodded.
Notice the emblem?
He pointed to the tiny relief stamped into the brass. A delicate oak leaf surrounded by a ring, identical to the red wax seal from the 1872 ledger and the one on Fiona's papers. Agatha pressed her palm to the cold metal. Someone doesn't want anyone wandering beyond this. Or perhaps someone is very particular about history, repeating exactly as it should, Charles said quietly. A crow cawed from a distant tree, its sharp cry breaking the morning stillness.
Agatha flinched, glancing at him.
Dramatic, isn't it? He smirked.
Dembley tends to favour theatrics. She studied his glove again. You swear that mud isn't yours?
Cross my heart, he said, though the trace of dark soil suggested otherwise. The silence stretched, punctuated by the gentle clink of chain links in the breeze. Agatha traced the initials on the lock and murmured, So the gate's closed. Locked. Secret safe for now. Charles glanced at her, eyes twinkling. For now. But some locks, Aggie, aren't meant to keep people out. They're meant to keep the past contained. Agatha nodded, feeling that familiar tingle of anticipation. Between the ledger, the scrap of blue fabric, and now the emblem on the lock, the pieces were aligning, though not yet into a picture anyone could read completely. Well, she said, straightening her scarf, if someone wanted me to stay away, they've only made it more interesting. Charles chuckled. Exactly why I enjoy your company, Agatha. You're far too curious for your own good. Chapter 5. Whispers and Alibis. The afternoon sun filtered weakly through lace curtains as Agatha stepped into Dembley Manor once more. The air was warmer than she remembered, the faint scent of lavender mingling with the dampness of the old stone walls. Mrs. Dalrymple greeted her at the door with a stiff nod, but her posture betrayed unease. Agatha, she said, her voice polite but thin, do come in. Tea is ready. Agatha followed her into the drawing room. The usual polish and precision remained, yet something was off. The teacups on the tray were mismatched, one chipped at the rim, another with a faint brown stain where it had been knocked over. Mrs. Dalrymple's gloved hands trembled as she poured, the porcelain rattling lightly against the saucer. You look well, my dear, Agatha said lightly, masking her curiosity. Mrs. Dalrymple's lips pressed together.
I've had an uncomfortable morning. That girl, Fiona Bexley, she came to me yesterday. Agatha tilted her head, sipping her tea.
Did she?
And how did that go?
The widow's gaze dropped to her cup, as though afraid to meet Agatha's eyes. She demanded access to the gate, insisted it was her right, and threatened to reveal what lies beneath if I refused. Agatha set her cup down carefully, noting the half-burnt envelope tucked into the fireplace corner, its edges curling in the heat. The phrase, "what lies beneath," echoed unsettlingly in her mind. "Reveal what lies beneath?" she asked gently. Mrs. Dalrymple nodded once, sharply.
Yes, something old.
"Something that belongs or belonged to my family. I cannot
have it disturbed, and yet she knows."
"That girl knows more than she should." Agatha's fingers drummed lightly on the table, her mind racing through all she'd already seen. The ledger, the chain, Fiona's smudged documents.
Do you think she discovered something in the archives?
The widow's hands trembled slightly more.
Perhaps.
Or perhaps she only suspects. Either way, it is enough to frighten me. She glanced at the fireplace, where the embered envelope seemed to smoulder silently. Before Agatha could probe further, a sharp knock rang through the room. Mrs. Dalrymple startled, nearly tipping her teacup, which rattled against the chipped rim. "Constable," the widow called, her voice tight. "What is it?"
Agatha rose with a quiet sigh.
The constable entered, hat in hand, face carefully neutral, but eyes revealing something he wished to conceal. "Mrs. Dalrymple, Miss Raisin," he began, "we've found something at the riverbank this morning." Agatha's pulse quickened. "Something?" she echoed. He hesitated, drawing a folded piece of paper from his coat pocket. "It appears related to the dispute at Dembley Gate. We're still investigating, but—" His voice trailed, and Agatha caught the flicker of tension in Mrs. Dalrymple's eyes. The widow clutched her teacup tightly, the chipped rim pressing into her fingers.
"Tell me," she whispered, voice barely audible. Agatha leaned forward slightly, the corners of her mouth tight with anticipation.
Whatever the constable had found, it was tied into the gate, the dispute, and Fiona's disappearance. And the phrase, "what lies beneath," no longer felt merely ominous. It felt like a warning etched in the very air around them. Outside, the wind rustled the ivy along the manor walls.
Inside, the tension pressed in, thick and almost tangible. Agatha's mind raced. The ledger, the blue scrap, the chain, Fiona, the walking stick, the threat, and now this.
All threads of the same knot, waiting to unravel, if anyone dared pull at them. She sipped her tea again, letting the warmth settle in her chest, while her eyes never left the constable, calculating the next move, knowing the afternoon was about to become far less ordinary. The morning mist hung heavy over the riverbank, curling like pale fingers through the reeds.
Agatha followed the constable's lead, boots sinking slightly into the damp earth.
The village had gathered at a cautious distance, murmuring anxiously. Charles trailed behind her, hat tipped low, his expression unreadable. "Here," the constable said, kneeling beside a tangle of reeds. A leather satchel lay half-submerged, edges slick with mud and water. Agatha knelt, brushing away the reeds carefully. The leather was scuffed and worn, clearly abandoned in haste or violence. She opened it slowly, heart thudding. Inside were papers, old and brittle, some tied with faded ribbon. The topmost bore the faint watermark of a trustee agreement, not executed.
Agatha's fingers traced the letters, noting how the ink had feathered from the damp. "They're estate documents," she murmured, scanning the title.
Dembley Manor.
"Boundary agreements and—"
She pulled out a small, broken locket, tarnished silver with a delicate clasp snapped clean. One side held a miniature portrait of a young woman, unmistakably Mrs. Dalrymple. In her youth, Agatha's breath caught. She turned the locket. The second portrait, meant to mirror the first, had been scratched out deliberately. Someone had erased the other face. Charles leaned closer, squinting at the papers. "Looks like the missing heir," he murmured.
And judging by this locket, it was a woman. Agatha's mind raced.
The heir was disowned, erased from memory. She held the locket delicately, as though the tiny, silent faces could speak the secrets of generations.
That explains the disputes, the gate.
The obsession with secrecy. It wasn't about public access. It was about hiding her story. A faint breeze rattled the reeds, and the broken satchel whispered against the mud. Agatha's eyes swept the surrounding banks, imagining Fiona navigating the fog, discovering this truth and disappearing. "She found the truth," Agatha whispered under her breath, "and someone silenced her." Charles touched her arm lightly.
"Do you really think she was silent?"
Or did she run? Agatha shook her head slowly. I don't know, but the care someone took to erase that second portrait, it wasn't accidental. Whoever wanted her gone feared what she might reveal. She carefully folded the locket and the documents into the satchel. The villagers watched silently, unease pressing on the air like the morning mist. The constable's voice broke through.
We'll take this back to the station.
Secure it properly. Agatha straightened, hands still wet from the riverbank.
Charles, she said quietly, the gate isn't just an entrance.
It's a marker. A boundary between what the world sees and what the family buried long ago. He nodded, eyes lingering on the twisted reeds. Dembley's secrets run deeper than any footpath or council dispute.
And now someone knows we're sniffing too close. Agatha glanced down at the locket again, the scratched-out face hauntingly blank.
The river flowed silently, indifferent to the human dramas unfolding along its banks. For a moment, the sun broke through the mist, glinting off the broken clasp. The light caught Agatha's eyes, reflecting both clarity and uncertainty. Whoever had hidden this truth had underestimated Fiona, and underestimated her own curiosity. She tucked the satchel under her arm, determination settling in her chest. One way or another the story of Dembley's lost heir would be told. Chapter 6. The Confession That Wasn't. The constable's face was grim when Agatha arrived at the gardener's cottage, a small, ivy-clad structure tucked behind the walled orchard. He'd already warned her off, muttering something about ongoing investigations and the gardener being highly agitated. But Agatha's curiosity, sharpened over days of Dembley intrigue, could not be contained. The door creaked open under her knock. Inside, the cottage smelled of earth, wet wood, and old tea. The gardener, a lean man with greying hair and dirt-stained fingernails, rose from a worn chair, eyes wary. "Mrs. Raisin," he said, cautiously.
"I've nothing to say." Agatha stepped in, glancing around.
The walls were cluttered with yellowed newspaper clippings pinned haphazardly, reports of Dembley's previous owners, old boundary disputes, and black and white photos of the iron gate. One photo showed a younger Mrs. Dalrymple standing stiffly by the gate, a child's expression of curiosity frozen in the frame. On a far wall, a childlike pencil drawing caught her eye. It depicted the gate, rudimentary yet exact in detail, framed by the same twisting ivy that covered the estate.
Agatha frowned. "This wasn't mere nostalgia, it was an obsession. You seem fond of Dembley," she said lightly, stepping closer. The gardener's eyes darted nervously. It remembers," he said, voice low.
"The land remembers." Agatha nodded slowly, her mind turning over each word. "And the night Fiona disappeared?" He swallowed, shoulders tensing.
"I saw her by the gate, yes, but don't think it means anything.
She woke it again." Agatha's stomach gave a small, uneasy twist. "Woke it again?" she repeated. "You mean the gate?" He looked at her, pale and serious. "No, the estate. Some things aren't meant to be disturbed." She wandered toward the teapot on the worn table, glancing beneath it out of habit. Her fingers brushed something cold. A small key, neatly labelled DG. The initials mirrored the 1872 ledger, the padlock on the gate, and the sketches she had seen in Fiona's satchel. Agatha pocketed it discreetly, heart quickening. She could feel the threads pulling tighter. This gardener's fear wasn't guilt. It was reverence, or perhaps terror, tied to Dembley's long-buried secrets. "Why are you so afraid?" she asked quietly. His gaze dropped, the lines of age and labour etched deeply into his face.
"You can ask questions.
You can pry. But remember, some things belong to the past." She woke it, and now it watches. Agatha felt a shiver trace her spine. The cottage was quiet, yet alive with the weight of history. The photos, the clippings, the childlike drawing, the key, all tangible reminders that the estate had its own memory. "Thank you," she said softly, rising. "I think I understand more now than I did before." The gardener nodded, relief washing briefly over his features, though tension lingered in his shoulders. Agatha sensed he wanted only to return to the quiet ritual of his daily work, not to face the eyes of the curious. Outside, the wind rattled the ivy against the cottage wall. Agatha's mind replayed the gardener's words. She woke it again. Whoever she was, Fiona perhaps, had triggered something long forgotten, something that the land itself seemed to remember. She tucked the keys safely into her coat pocket, a tangible connection to the past, and a promise that Dembley's secrets were not yet finished with her. The moon hung low over the countryside, pale and unblinking, as Agatha crept down the gravel path to Dembley Gate. The night was still, the mist curling around the hedgerows like ghosts of the past. Her coat rustled softly with each step, and her breath puffed small clouds into the chilled air. The key from the gardener's teapot rested heavy in her pocket, a promise of discovery and possibly danger. At the gate she paused, studying the ironwork in the moonlight. The padlock gleamed faintly, brass catching the silver glow, but she ignored it, letting her fingers trace the post. Her eyes fell on a small seam she had never noticed before, a panel cleverly integrated into the woodwork, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. Her pulse quickened.
This had to be it.
Kneeling, she inserted the key into a hidden slot. It turned with a stubborn click, and the panel shifted inward, revealing a hollow compartment. A rusted box rested inside, almost swallowed by shadow and time. Agatha's hands trembled slightly as she lifted it out, brushing the accumulated dust away. The box was heavy, corroded at the corners, its surface pitted with age. She pried it open carefully. Inside lay a bundle of deeds tied with faded ribbon, documents yellowed but unmistakable, the rightful ownership of Dembley's lands, belonging to Fiona's family line. Her breath caught in triumph.
All the disputes, the threats, the vanished woman, the midnight visits, it had all led to this.
The estate, so long controlled by fear and secrecy, had a legal claim belonging elsewhere. A faint noise made her freeze. Footsteps, careful and measured, approaching through the mist. She strained her ears. The gravel whispered under weight not her own. "Who's there?" she called softly, trying to mask her fear with calm. No answer came, only the faint shift of shadow. A hand emerged from the darkness, pale against the silver glow of moonlight, brushing toward the box. "You shouldn't have found that," a voice whispered. Low and cold, Agatha recoiled slightly, clutching the documents closer. I
don't know what you mean," she said, though her heart thudded fiercely.
The voice was calm, controlled, yet threaded with a threat that made the night feel suddenly oppressive. The figure stepped closer, but Agatha held her ground, realizing she had the advantage of knowledge. She could see only the outline, tall, slim, careful. She could not make out the face, but the intent was unmistakable. The box rattled in her hands as the shadowed hand struck the lid. It snapped shut with a metallic clang, echoing sharply across the still night.
Agatha's pulse surged.
She tried to lift it again, but the lock's old mechanisms had shifted. Whoever had come had anticipated her reach, or had been waiting all along. A low crow cawed somewhere in the distance, its cry slicing through the quiet. Agatha glanced at the padlock, the faintly gleaming brass reflecting the moonlight, and then back at the shadows. Whoever it was had vanished as silently as they appeared, leaving her clutching only a closed box that now seemed heavier with secrets than ever. She exhaled slowly, forcing herself to calm the rising tide of adrenaline. The documents were safe for now, hidden in the folds of her coat, but the encounter had been a stark reminder. Dembley's past was not finished with her, and if Fiona had found the truth before her, there were others who would go to any lengths to keep it buried. Agatha stepped back from the gate, eyes scanning the misted landscape. Somewhere in the shadows someone watched, and she knew with a cold certainty that this revelation had only just begun to stir the old ghosts of Dembley. Chapter 7. The Gatekeeper's Truth. Agatha stumbled backward from the gate, heart hammering, clutching the rusted box and Fiona's documents tightly to her chest. The night had grown colder, mist curling around the iron posts like fingers trying to snatch her secrets away. Every instinct screamed to leave, yet something told her the truth was closer than ever. She returned to Dembley Manor under the cover of darkness, slipping quietly through the garden path. The house was silent, though a faint light flickered behind the drawing-room curtains.
Agatha's pulse quickened.
She knew whom she needed to confront. Mrs. Dalrymple was waiting, seated at her writing desk, hands folded neatly, eyes calm, almost eerily so. The teacup from their last meeting still rested on a saucer, abandoned but untouched. The widow's composure was unnerving. "Agatha," she said softly, voice steady, "I suppose you've discovered enough to ask questions now?" Agatha squared her shoulders. "Enough to know that the disputes, the secrecy, the missing woman, it all traces back to you." Mrs. Dalrymple's lips pressed into a thin line.
"Yes," she admitted almost serenely.
"I am the last living heir. Decades ago I falsified the records."
"Took what was never truly mine," his breath caught.
"Then Fiona, she discovered it?" The widow's gaze flickered downward for the briefest moment. "She did."
"And she confronted me."
"I admit it, I feared exposure. But I did not harm her."
"I only feared the consequences of truth coming to light." Agatha's hands tightened on the document.
"But someone did."
"And you know who?"
Mrs. Dalrymple's eyes met hers directly, calm and unflinching. "Yes," she said softly, the ticking of a nearby mantel clock punctuating each word. "It was Charles." Agatha froze, mind spinning. Charles, her witty, reliable, ever-charming companion, implicated in Fiona's disappearance? The thought seemed impossible, yet the evidence pressed against her chest, the documents, the locket, the padlock.
Even the mud-stained glove she had noticed weeks before. "The glove," Mrs. Dalrymple continued,
as if reading her thoughts, "didn't belong to him entirely. It carries traces of blood, Fiona's blood. He knew what he risked, and he acted." Agatha's stomach churned. Her mind flashed back to every moment with Charles, the quiet charm, the playful banter, the midnight strolls. She had trusted him, leaned on him for insight and companionship. And now, Mrs. Dalrymple's voice cut sharply into her spiral of disbelief. "You see, my dear, sometimes the heart chooses loyalty over law, and sometimes it chooses wrong. Charles, he acted on what he thought was right, but he underestimated you. Or perhaps he counted on your curiosity to uncover what he tried to conceal." The ticking clock seemed louder now, each second a hammer striking at the foundation of everything Agatha believed. Time and trust had intertwined, exposing secrets no one could ignore. Agatha sank into a chair, running her hands over the documents, over the locket.
I don't know what to think," she whispered.
Shock, betrayal, and grief tangled together, heavy as the night itself. Mrs. Dalrymple inclined her head, voice low but measured. "Truth is rarely comfortable. Yet, at last, it is out in the open. You know, the ledger, the gate, the hidden deeds. The estate's legacy has been restored, though at a price none of us expected." Agatha stared at her, absorbing the weight of confession. The widow's calm, the ticking clock, the traces of blood, the betrayal of someone she considered an ally, it all converged in a single, shivering realization. Dembley had finally revealed its deepest, darkest secret, and now
Agatha understood that solving the mystery meant confronting someone she had never imagined she would suspect.
Agatha's footsteps echoed along the stone path as she approached Charles in the quiet of his study. Moonlight spilled through the tall windows, catching the brass desk lamp in a soft halo. He looked up, a trace of unease in his normally composed expression. "Charles," she began, voice low but firm, "we need to speak plainly. Now." He leaned back in his chair, hands clasped before him. "I suppose you've pieced some things together," he said cautiously. "I know you had something to do with the deeds, the padlock, even Fiona's disappearance," Agatha said, her gaze unflinching. "So tell me the truth." Charles exhaled slowly. "I admit I moved the deeds. I hid them from prying eyes to protect Mrs. Dalrymple from scandal."
"I never meant harm to anyone."
"Fiona left alive. She found out too much and panicked, but she was not killed by me." Agatha's brow furrowed.
"Then where is she?" I can show you," he said, rising, leading her to the gate under the pale glow of early.
The padlock, glinted faintly. He retrieved a small, hidden latch beneath the post, a mechanism she had never noticed before, and opened it. Below the gate, partially hidden by roots and ivy, a tunnel yawned into the earth. The air was damp and cold, carrying a faint metallic scent. Charles held a lantern as they stepped carefully into the narrow passage. Agatha's heart pounded. Water gurgled softly beneath their boots, and a thin underground stream reflected the lantern light like liquid glass. At the far end, they saw her. Fiona lay motionless, pale but preserved in the icy stream, a peaceful expression on her face despite the tragedy. Agatha knelt beside her, noting the initials scratched into the tunnel wall. F.B. Truth. A single daffodil had grown by the water, defiant against the darkness, a fragile emblem of renewal amid sorrow.
Agatha's lips pressed together, emotions wavering between grief and resolve. Charles's voice was low.
She tried to escape, but the tunnel was unstable. She fell and was carried downstream until it stopped here. I found the entrance afterward, but the water preserved her rather than ending her life. I couldn't risk moving her until it was safe to retrieve the documents and confirm the estate's history. Agatha's fingers rested on the water's surface, the cold biting but grounding. "The land remembers indeed," she whispered, recalling the gardener's earlier words and the weight of centuries pressing through the soil and stone. The two of them worked silently, carefully arranging supports and marking the tunnel for recovery. The tragedy was undeniable, yet in the documents, the locket, and the preservation of truth, there was clarity. The dispute had never been about property alone. It had been about legacy, secrecy, and courage to uncover hidden truths. Agatha rose, gazing at the tunnel and the water that had held Fiona in its embrace. Her fury at deception had softened into solemn resolve. The mystery had claimed a life, yet in understanding, she found purpose to ensure that Dembley's story would finally be told with honesty and respect. The wind whispered through the gate above, carrying the faint scent of ivy and daffodils. Agatha squared her shoulders, ready to face the aftermath, knowing the estate's secrets would finally be laid bare. Chapter 8. Closure at Dembley Gate. Sunlight poured across the village green, golden and warm, as Agatha strolled toward Dembley Gate. The ironwork gleamed. Newly painted, its hinges oiled until they whispered softly when moved. The path beneath her boots was clean, lined with freshly trimmed hedges. Birds chirped in the morning air, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of dew-soaked grass. After weeks of turmoil, the estate finally seemed at peace. Agatha paused at the gate, hands resting lightly on the cold iron. A robin landed gracefully on the top rail, tilting its head as if approving the restoration. Agatha smiled faintly, allowing herself a rare moment of serenity. The gate, once a boundary of secrets and fear, now felt like a symbol of truth returned. A small crowd had gathered nearby, villagers murmuring quietly as they helped set up a modest memorial for Fiona. Fresh flowers, simple but bright, were arranged with care, and a small plaque engraved with her initials rested in the center. Agatha ran her fingers over the letters, imagining the courage it had taken for Fiona to uncover the estate's secrets, and the price she had paid in pursuit of truth. Mrs. Dalrymple approached, her elegant posture softened by age and reflection. She had agreed to donate the disputed land to the parish, ending a century-old feud that had long weighed on Carsley. The villagers whispered their thanks, some offering quiet smiles, others nodding in acknowledgement of the widow's gesture. Agatha could see the relief in their eyes, though shadows still lingered in the corners of old memories. "You've done well, Agatha," Mrs. Dalrymple said softly, her voice gentle. "The estate's story is finally where it belongs, and I hope Fiona's bravery is remembered." Agatha inclined her head.
"It will be. And the land."
"It seems content at last." She walked slowly along the restored path, noting how the flowers by the gate swayed gently in the breeze. The soft murmur of conversation and laughter mingled with birdsong, creating a comforting rhythm that eased the tension of the past weeks. A passing villager paused, tipping his hat. "I hear there are still some letters missing," he said with a wink, "but that's another tale for another time." Agatha chuckled quietly, letting the thought linger without disturbing the calm. Secrets, after all, were part of life, some meant to fade, others waiting for the right moment to surface. She returned to the gate, resting her hands on the smooth iron once more. The robin had shifted slightly, tilting toward her, as if to remind her that even in resolution, small joys could be found. Nostalgic music seemed to drift in on the breeze, soft and melodic, wrapping around the scene like a gentle sigh of relief. Agatha closed her eyes briefly, savouring the clarity of the moment. The disputes had ended, the truths revealed, and the estate itself seemed lighter, freer, as though Fiona's spirit lingered in quiet gratitude. The village had regained its rhythm, its peace restored by honesty, courage, and the careful hands of those willing to face what lay hidden. With one last glance at the gate, steadfast, bright, and full of stories, Agatha turned toward the village green. She felt a deep sense of closure, tempered by reflection, knowing that the mysteries of Dembley had finally been honoured and laid to rest, ready for new stories to unfold under its watchful iron rails. Back in her cosy castle cottage, Agatha settled into her favourite armchair, the morning sun filtering softly through the curtains. The kettle whistled gently, steam curling upward, and she poured herself a fresh cup of tea, savouring the familiar comfort of warmth and aroma. As she lifted her cup, a crisp envelope caught her eye on the side table. It was unexpected, thick, cream-coloured paper, and sealed with the unmistakable blue wax she had come to associate with intrigue. The seal bore no initials, just a smooth, glossy surface that glinted in the sunlight.
Agatha's curiosity prickled immediately. She broke the wax carefully, letting the soft crack echo through the room.
Inside, a single note rested, the handwriting elegant and precise. "Your curiosity is wasted in Carsley. Try Much Cadden next." Agatha's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. She set the note aside for a moment and poured herself another cup of tea, allowing the warmth to settle through her fingers and into her chest. The message was brief, mysterious, and perfectly provocative. Carsley had been quiet for long enough, she thought. Perhaps it was time to leave the village's cobbled paths and hedgerows behind for a while. Her eyes roamed around the room. The armchair, the teapot, the small stack of novels by the window, all familiar and comforting. And yet, a thrill of anticipation stirred beneath the calm surface. The thought of a new adventure, of secrets waiting to be uncovered beyond the boundaries of Carsley, made her pulse quicken with quiet excitement. As she reached to place the envelope back on the table, her cat, ever the mischievous observer, batted it with a soft paw. The envelope tumbled across the polished surface, landing in a small, neat heap on the rug.
Agatha laughed, the sound light and cheerful, imagining her feline companion's tacit approval of the challenge ahead. She picked the note up again, reading it once more.
The handwriting, the tone, the very suggestion that her curiosity would be wasted, all of it was an invitation, a gentle provocation that spoke directly to her nature. It was impossible to resist. Carsley had been a lesson in patience, observation, and the quiet thrill of solving puzzles. Much Cadden promised the next story, the next riddle, the next layer of intrigue to unravel. Agatha leaned back, cradling her teacup, eyes glinting with amusement. There was a sense of completion, yes. The disputes at Dembley Gate had been resolved, the land returned to its rightful place, and the missing pieces acknowledged. Yet this envelope, crisp and blue, hinted that the world beyond her cottage still held secrets, waiting for someone bold enough, or perhaps curious enough, to pursue them. With a final glance at the note, she allowed herself a smirk, the kind that spoke of anticipation, cleverness, and a readiness for adventure. The tea warmed her hands, the sunlight warmed her cheeks, and the possibilities stretched out beyond the village, inviting her forward. The cat, satisfied with its work, curled against her ankle.
Agatha chuckled again.
Whatever awaited in Much Cadden, she thought, it would be perfectly, deliciously intriguing.